Hello, everybody. My name's James. Welcome to the People's Poll podcast. And the surge has been off for what's beginning to feel like ever. I've dipped into one of the YouTube Hall of Famers. Well, it is when we look at his FPL ranks. He's nervously laughing away. But let me introduce you to the brilliant Harry Daniels, otherwise known on the Bird app as FPL Harry. How are you, mate?
I'm very good. I've listened to you guys for a long time and Patreon now as well. But to be invited on to chat is great. Obviously, we've chatted a little bit, but yeah, happy to be podding with you.
Very much so, mate. Yeah, I messaged you last week. We was looking at potentially getting you on the main pod. It didn't quite work out timing wise, and we come up with this idea that maybe we could have you on and talk about something specific FPL related. And you guys have voted from the three options that are made available on Sunday evening between bottom nine FPL assets. Let's be honest, we're only buying from about five teams at the moment, so that wasn't going to win, or the idea of defensive midfielders being added to the FPL world. You have voted for a discussion on content creators, copycats, and team leaks. And we're going to discuss all of those in a little bit of detail. But as Harry's here, and he's a Chelsea fan, it's Monday afternoon. So it's pre-Everton Tottenham, if you're wondering why I'm in a good mood or in a bad mood. It'd be wrong not to get your opinion on Graham Potter, mate, and what happened.
Yeah, so I was actually a little bit surprised when the news came out on Sunday, more because of the timing, I think, than anything, and with what seems like is going to be the position between now and the end of the season. I am in the camp that I do not think it is the wrong decision. I do think he was out of his depth. I look at some of the press conferences where we were performing badly and he was making jokes sort of about crisis meetings in press conferences, things like that. After full time and Aston Villa, about two players walking around the pitch applauding the fans, there being very little else, and Graham Potter standing in the dugout. I thought when he came that he was a great manager, and I still stand by that. But when he was at Brighton, you can lose games like 2-0 at home to Villa. You can lose the odd game as long as you're playing good football. And we're starting to play a little bit better, not defending well, but we're starting to play a little bit better. But it seems like Chelsea, where there is that cutthroat attitude, but any big club, you can't lose a game like 2-0 to Villa and think you can just get away with it and brush it under the carpet. And that was my worry when he joined. And there have been enough of those games this season where we've played okay. There have been enough games where we haven't played well, but we've played okay, but we've lost. And they would get brushed under the carpet maybe at Brighton, and at Chelsea, you can't really get away with that. And I just thought, yeah, a little bit out of his depth with the amount of characters and the high profile aspect of the club that, yeah, I think it was time. Whether it was now, whether it was the end of the season, it didn't make that much odds to me, though.
Good manager, wrong club, do you think?
Yeah, and I'm sure like there are a few other clubs at the moment without a manager who I'm sure will be very happy to have Graham Potter. And I think he's still a good manager, and I think he will still go on to do good things. I do question it a little bit when we look at how well Brighton have done after he's gone, whether how much of the success when he was at Brighton was him. I'm not saying it wasn't him, but how well they've continued to do just makes me have that little bit of doubt about whether it was all him when he was there. But I'm sure he'll go on to do good things. And if he goes to Leicester, which I think feels like a good fit, and I know you've mentioned it feels like a good fit, I'm sure Potter at Leicester would do good things. So yeah, right, good manager, just didn't suit us. Just like I don't think Lampard when he came, although he's not Potter's level, doesn't suit us. We need a certain type of manager.
What is that?
Well, sadly, it's someone who's going to return pretty quickly and someone who's going to get the team playing well pretty quickly and also be on the right side of the fans as well, which Potter never really got to the point where he was in favour with the fans. You look at the likes of particularly Thomas Tuchel, one of, if not my favourite Chelsea manager that we've had. He was very, very good at dealing with the fans. He was very likeable as well, and he got results very, very quickly. And I think, sadly, for the club that I support, that is kind of the nature of it. The project type managers, which Potter probably falls into, doesn't seem to cut it at the moment. We thought maybe it would change under Todd Bowley. Obviously, it hasn't. He probably got longer than he would have done under Roman, to be honest. But yeah, we're still in that headspace because that's the culture of the fan base, I think, more than anything.
What's the feeling amongst the fan base towards Bolly?
I I don't think it's fantastic. I think there's a little bit of he's tried to do what he can, but it does feel a little bit like of a splatter gun. I'm going to see what sticks. I don't really know what I'm doing. I look at a lot of the signings and I think Wesley Fofana, which he didn't sign, looks great. And I look at Enzo Fernandez and think he looks great. And I look at a lot of the other money that we've spent at the moment and think we could have done a lot better for what we spent. I think he's tried to come in, know that it's a club that spends a lot of money. He's tried to do that without real aim and, without real focus. And we've had, of course, great negotiation team under Roman and previously all of that team that sort of were involved in finding players, which were great. It feels like that aspect of it is just not there. They are buying players, feels like, because other clubs are interested in. Of course, Mudryk, the key example there. I don't mind him, spending money if we feel we have gaps, but I feel like he's plugged gaps in the wrong place to try and find high-profile players that maybe one of them sticks. And I'm not a massive fan of how we've signed in particular.
Are you worried about it? It's worth saying, if we go back 12 months, the club was in obviously a very precarious situation where you weren't even allowed to sell match tickets and stuff. Are you concerned about another financial situation where if you don't get back in Europe quickly, that you could drift down the table, not necessarily regularly to 11th, but sort of out of the run in the top 4?
Yeah, well, we're in that situation this season where I actually hope we don't get Europe now. And I hope we finish outside the top 8 or whatever it is that gets into the Conference League. Because
so you don't want to win the Champions League then, mate? No?
Well, of course, if I could win the Champions League, but with Bruno in charge, taking us to the Bernabeu and then against City or Bayern, I'm ruling that out. But it has happened a couple of times with a late manager change for Chelsea that we then go on to win the Champions League. But it feels a little bit too soon after the last time we did it. But outside of that, I hope we don't get it, because I do think, the likes of Reece James, who are so important to us, we miss them when we get injured, and he gets injured when we play a lot of games. And if we can keep a bit more fluidity, like we've started with a different front three in like 9 out of our last 10 games or something crazy, because of injuries, because of rotation as well. We do need a bit of solidity in that front line. I don't worry about next year not having it, but I don't necessarily look at our squad and think that's going to compete with some of the others that are up there at the moment. So I'm not worried, but I don't necessarily think next year will be top 4, even without the Champions League.
If you don't even get in Europa, for example, how are you going to play all these players next year? When are they getting minutes, mate?
They're not. Again, and they're not. And some of them are going to end up probably leaving this summer, Mount being the big one that we're looking at the moment. I hope he stays, and I hope a lot of Chelsea fans probably fall into the same camp, although he's not been at his best this season. But there will be some of those players who are realizing that without Europe, that the rotation there will be at a minimum. They might not get as much game time, which is a concern, although we could do with getting rid of a few of them.
And who do you want as next manager?
I can't say I know the options in enough detail. The ex-Bayern manager is the one that a lot of talk about, and I think a lot of people look at him and think he's probably the best successor, but I don't know enough about him. I know he did well at Bayern, but I think most managers could do particularly well at Bayern Munich. I don't think it's necessarily the hardest managerial job, and that's particularly why they got rid of him, is he did a good job but not a great Bayern Munich standard job. He looks fine, he looks good. Poch is still out there looking for a job, and I know
look at you calling him Poch. I can call him Poch, you can't.
But yeah, I don't look around and think there's someone that stands out that is like Tuchel or like a Klopp or a Pep, the top managers in the league that I think could really come in and do a good job, which is also a little bit worrying, but it's also why they're likely to wait until the end of the season before they go and sign anyone.
Okay. I think you'll find it probably may well end up being with Julian Nagelsmann, because I think you've got a few of the team upstairs have worked with him previously, haven't they? So that link seems to make a lot of sense. Okay. I want to talk about you and your channel, Harry. You're on the verge of reaching 50,000 subscribers on YouTube. Grown this channel completely by yourself. What made you start?
So I started a little bit when I was at uni and had quite a lot of time on my hands, enjoyed sort of just starting to get into FPL. There wasn't loads of content. Twitter wasn't that big. I did a couple of streams here or there and I watched quite a lot of it. And I thought, I've grown up with a lot of people watching YouTube, sort of having YouTube as part of our lives. Like I look at the Sidemen, those sort of KSI type figures, a lot of them are my age or just slightly older than me. And I think a lot of people my age grew up with YouTube being like a big form of how we consume content. I thought I'd give it a go. It's a skill that I quite enjoyed learning. And then we went into lockdown and I just had so much time on my hands that I thought like I tried doing a little bit more. I had evenings where I was, sat watching TV and I thought maybe I'll try it a bit more. And I've just really enjoyed it. Again, it's a skill that I've learned. And if I'm quite, I suppose, proud that I've got to the point where I can produce something that looks like that more than anything else. Whether people enjoy it or not is something else. But, to be able to teach yourself something and learn something from scratch is quite something. And it's, become something that I love. It is something, I spend 2 hours in my evenings, which I'm sure my girlfriend doesn't completely love that I spend all my time doing it, but she's very understanding. And it is something that I used to pass the time. And it is something that, I get a lot of enjoyment out of doing as well.
How many videos would you produce a week, do you say then?
Normally 3 videos plus like the deadline stream. So yeah, 4 pieces of content a week plus a 9 to 5 job.
Nice. A lot of hours. You sure you got a girlfriend or are you just making it up, mate?
My chat seems to think I make it up as well. So you won't be the first.
That's great, mate. I mean, I've said to you that I think you're in a position where you could consider going full time on it. There's a lot of individuals who have obviously made that step. Is it something you want to consider?
Like if I got to the point where, watching football, talking about football and playing FPL was my full-time job, I think that'd be a dream for a lot of people in the community and a lot of football fans out there as well. So if it got to it, then that would be fantastic. I always say that wasn't my aim when I started it, and it's not my aim now. I actually have a job that I really enjoy and is very flexible as well. It allows me to do both things at the same time. So it's a dream rather than a goal. If I didn't ever reach that point, I would never think that I failed at what I'm doing or I haven't reached what I want to. Of course, like if that happened, like great, like dream come true, but it's not why I do it really.
What do you think of other content creators? I think there's a lot of people think there's beef between us all. I don't want them people to have views. Is it just me or we're all very supportive of each other, no?
I agree. I particularly chat to Ross, Raptor, and Oscar quite a lot, and we go to events and stuff together. But there is very little of. I know in other communities, when you look at FIFA, etc., it is very. I want the views for myself. I want to keep stuff for myself. It doesn't feel like it happens in FPL. There's enough people out there to watch all the content, and there's a lot of different angles and views on what people are doing. That I don't think there's any beef. If so, I'm not involved in it.
No, but are you competitive then? Do you think, oh shit, Andy Mears has got more views than me again on Let's Talk? I mean, he's always going to do that. But do you look at Oscar's views and Raptors and see the way they've grown and think, oh shit, they've got more views than me or vice versa this week? Does that matter to you?
No, not really at all. And actually we chat about it quite a lot because particularly there are certain weeks where, things don't go as well, views don't go as well. But that's probably because, it's not an interesting week of FPL, for example. Like game week 30 views and stuff won't be as good as game week 29, for example, because game week 29 was a big double and a lot of people had a lot of stuff to do with their team. So we chat about it more about that, but I don't feel competitive about it as well. I think some of them around us, we've all got something different, so it's great to see them growing as well. And if I can, tag along with them, that's great.
Yeah, super. One of the things we're not always privy to is stuff that comes in chat very late on. I'm thinking about someone had a very, very interesting reaction about 5 minutes after deadline, Harry, about some Bukayo Saka news.
About 5 minutes before deadline, yeah.
Was it 5 minutes before? Sorry.
Yeah. So
how are you watching Andy while you're streaming live? Because I was doing a deadline stream and I didn't know till after deadline.
So I had someone come into my chat who told me that there are a few people who started to feed in saying Saka's not starting. And I was like, where have you seen this? And they were like, Andy said it. And I was like, okay. So I got my phone out and was listening to Andy's stream whilst trying to do mine as well, listening to what he's saying. And I had a couple of transfer plans which did involve selling Saka, and then I had about 3 minutes before the deadline to try and make them. So actually, I've got the people to thank who came from Andy's stream to let me know, who told me that Saka was on the bench, and I did end up selling him, although it was to James Maddison. Hasn't turned out very well so far.
Your initial reaction, though, considering it was April the 1st as well, and for the benefit of overseas listeners may not know, it's April Fool's Day. We're in the morning, basically. Everyone's free reign to take the piss and lie and tell jokes. Yeah. You must have thought a couple of minutes to deadline, that's a wind up.
It was until I knew it had come from Andy. When I saw it in my chat,
But
I was
your
like,
instinct, not Andy's, been wound up as well, because there was no logical sense in Bukayo Saka not starting with the info we had, right? Like, literally none.
Yeah. So I then checked, and I was like, he did play both in the internationals. That was about the only thing I could go off. And I listened to Andy, and he was then like, once I got to the point where I was listening to him, he was pretty certain that it was not an April Fool. And at that point, I was like, right, I don't think his source would be lying to him, because, you know, it's good for Andy that he has it and good for his source as well. So at that point, but when I first heard it, I was like, that seems really bizarre. And I watched a few other people when they got the news as well. And their first reaction was like, Saka doesn't get benched. Saka plays games when Arsenal play games, whether he's got two good legs or one. So a lot of people first off, but once I got to listening to Andy's stream whilst trying to do mine, I'm slightly more convinced that he wasn't going to play.
Do you think there are any content creators in the YouTube world that would intentionally mislead FPL managers?
No.
But you know, people think that there are, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
I presume people think that we would, but
I mean,
I don't see anyone.
Andy's for anybody who lives on the rock, Andy's going to join me on the podcast on Thursday. Andy from Let's Talk FPL. Andy's explanation, he could not have been any clearer in terms of it's your responsibility to make the decision.
Yeah.
And what he said, which is absolutely so true, is like, he's damned if he does, and he's damned if he's not. So if he shares the information and it's wrong, he's damned, right?
Yeah.
If he keeps it to himself because he thinks, I'm not sure about this, and then the deadline passes and like, fucking hell, I should have told everyone because I had the info, he's damned. He was damned either way. And then to be honest, I felt sick for him a little bit in the afternoon. I think, please be right for him that he's had this information and been brave enough to come and share it, and it's been right. But the fact that he had to explain himself and say, like, if you come back at me, it's not on. I'm trying to help people.
Yeah.
Have you had this experience yourself where you've had any information or?
Thankfully, I've never had team use. And although you think about it, you think, oh, I'd love to have it. But then that pressure of getting it and whether it's right or not, and having to trust that person who's going to give it to you, I'd rather not. Like, I'd rather keep it to yourself. Don't send it to me, because I don't want to be in that situation where Andy was. Like, I feel for him as well. And I put a post out being like, those people who would have come back giving him abuse for it, they're nowhere to be seen praising him for it. And that's what bugs me for it. Particularly, like, there's no need and there's absolutely no place to go back and have a go at him again, as he's only trying to help and he's only trying to make us all make better decisions. But then to not like thank him when it goes right as well is annoying. I think Andy actually did getting a bit of thanks and a bit of praise for it because of the sort of blow up of it. But generally, most of those people who would say nasty things and would come back out of the woodwork if it was wrong, yeah, that's the real issue with it. And I can imagine Andy was a bit torn about it as well, particularly being April Fool's Day, about whether to share it. And you could tell that from his stream from his back garden shed or wherever he was doing it. But yeah, it's a difficult one. I'm glad I don't get it, because I just rather, not have to deal with that decision of, do I trust it enough to share it, whether the backlash is worth it as well. So I don't get it, and I'm quite glad I don't.
Oscar at FPL Focal had also shared something. I think it's from Foulsey, as an account I'm not familiar with, but he tweeted on Friday night and said Haaland's out tomorrow. And it wasn't, Oscar didn't tweet it as, this is a good source. Oscar went full out. It's not playing.
Yeah.
And as soon as I saw that, I know straight away that's got to be 99% correct, unless Haaland wakes up in the morning and perhaps something's happened to Alvarez and the situation changes. He's not going to play. There's no reason that Oscar's going to come out and say he's not playing and bullshit anyone. People go, it's an April Fool's, it's a wind up and stuff. That the credibility at that stage, if that information is wrong, is so damning on reputations, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And then you get to the point where people start, if it's wrong, trying to find who your source is. And they say, well, if you're wrong, then tell us who your source is. So, we know who's giving the false information, which Oscar, to be fair, I talked to Oscar a lot about it, and it is a difficult situation to be in, because again, if you get it wrong, the downfall of you getting it wrong is not nearly as good as the praise that you get
getting it right.
Getting it right. So again, I'm happy I don't get it. That one from Oscar, again, he linked the source, but it was very concrete that Haaland was not going to play. So I saw it and I was very certain that was going to be the case. And when we got a league closer to the lineup again, saying the very similar thing, and he ended up not being in the squad as well, I was not surprised at all, because Oscar's not the type to share something unless he's very sure that it's going to be right. But yeah, as we say, the praise you get if you get these things right are not nearly half as good as the burnout if you put fake or wrong team news up.
How do you feel about the leaks generally? Would you rather it just didn't happen? I feel like something like that, where Oscar's gone the night before, that's hugely helpful to someone. The uncomfortable position that Andy was put in 5 minutes before deadlines, like,
yeah,
awful. How do you feel about leaks? Would you rather just not have them full stop, or is that part of the drama as you get towards deadline?
I quite like the drama. But
are you someone who normally goes late with your transfers?
If I can help it. So like this weekend, I was pretty locked in until I heard the Saka news, and then I ended up selling him. I don't dislike the leagues. I understand a lot why people, particularly who can't be at their phone 10 minutes before deadline, people who live elsewhere in the world, find it very difficult. And I'm about to go on holiday where I am at a 5-hour time difference, so I know that the two deadlines whilst I'm away are at 5 o'clock in the morning. So I know that either I set an alarm at 5:30 or 4:45 in the morning, or I miss the deadline. And in theory, if this was that, I would have missed that news. And I can understand how frustrating that would be for people. Being someone who's on the deadline every single week and is there 5-10 minutes before the deadline, or the day before, very switched on, I don't mind it. But I can understand for the masses why they don't appreciate it, and why it makes the game probably less fun for them.
Do you feel that's a valid point about people having advantages in different time zones, or is it?
Yes.
Or do you view it as it's a UK game? So
this is the whole.
Although it's a global game, to be honest.
Yeah. So it's a UK based focus game because it's about the Premier League,
but it's a global game.
It's a global game, and I don't know what the percentages of players in the UK are, but I imagine it's much less than, or about 50% of the players are in the UK, and 50% are probably elsewhere. I'm guessing on the numbers there, but it is a global game, and it comes back to the whole debate of when the deadline should be, right? And they moved it to an hour and a half. We're still getting like leaks, particularly on the first game. So where do we put the deadline? That's a whole nother debate. I do think that if you're on the other side of the world, it does put you at a disadvantage. If we think about the amount of times earlier in the season, particularly when Man City were the early kickoff, that we got early Haaland news, and that impacted what we were doing. If you're on the other side of the world, and let's say 5 to 10 times a season, you don't get that news, it probably knocks you down, 15, 20 points over the course of the season. And that's enough to knock you from just inside the top 10K to 15, 20K, for example. So it will have an implication on people. It does make the game slightly probably easier for those of us who are on the deadline all the time. So I do completely think they have a point, but I don't think there's a way to combat it.
So it's not a solution, basically. You wouldn't move the deadline, therefore, from what it is now, because it obviously has moved from an hour to an hour and a half. It's basically now at this stage, it's not really made any difference, has it?
If anything, it's kind of made it worse, because it's made it more selective about who has that news. Because at least when it was an hour before the deadline, you knew that 15 minutes before the deadline, there would be team news for the early game, pretty much, because that's when the media gets
Rockstar and your likes would have it.
Yes.
Yeah.
But what happens now with it being an hour and a half before the deadline is you only have people with club sources who are not waiting for the media to get it. So you only have very select people who know those specific sources are getting it. And it's just made the pool of people who have that news probably smaller than it was before. And so you either have, 50% of the game getting early team news, when now you have 20%, for example. Again, I'm making up numbers there, but you're just making it a narrow pool of people who are going to get that news. And I don't think, in theory, that's any better than it was at an hour before.
What solution would you go up? Would you go back to what it was, or would you consider 12 hours before, for example? Like if it's an 11 a.m. deadline, would you consider 11 p.m. on a Friday night?
Yeah. So again, you've got to think about it, because if it's 11 hours before, you still need the people to be able to see the Friday press conferences, for example, if they're, in another time zone. I don't necessarily think that solves anything, but you could just remove eliminate all sort of leaks from it, and you'd probably have none if that's the point, whether it's 12 hours or exactly whether it's 6 hours or something like that as well. But I was always under the impression when they were talking about at the beginning of the season that kickoff would be the best time, or half an hour before the deadline would be the best time, because if you're in that position where you're in the other side of the world, where you're in a different time zone, at least you know that if you do set your alarm and you need that team news, you know you're going to get it, right? You're not waking up at whatever hour in the morning and thinking, I might not get it, someone might leak it. You know you're going to see the team sheet before that first game goes. So if there is that level of commitment to playing the game, at least you have that sort of reassurance. Just moving it 12 hours before to a Friday night, and then it's a Friday night game, it ends up being a Friday morning
6 a.m. Yeah.
In theory, it sounds good, but in practice, it would be quite difficult to do, I think.
But then moving to kickoff also obviously hampers those on the other side of the world, right? Same thing. So then have they got to wake up to see the team like that? And I think that's probably the right solution, by the way, is to say, right, if it's a 12:30 kickoff, it's a 12:30 deadline. But the danger with that is we say, right, 11:30 to 12:30, everyone's got an hour. You've seen the team. You can wait you don't have to wait till 5 minutes before the end, but people will, because someone at 12:25 might have something from the 3 o'clocks, right?
Yeah.
So there's a never ending, there's no way of doing it, I don't think, of making everybody happy.
No. Without removing the leaks themselves.
It seems the closest, but you can't.
Yeah.
There'll always be leaks. It'll be different ways. So I think as we go further in time as well, I think like probably what happened with Haaland on Friday, educated guess here, is that Guardiola said we've got another training session at 4 o'clock, we'll determine then. There's a good chance he didn't do that training session, so it was obvious. And you just get more stuff like that will come out further and further, where people improve their sources. And we've seen loads of new people pop up this year with team leaks, etc. Okay, I think we'll go round on circles, but we'll still be arguing about it in a year. You are a very good FPL manager.
Thank you. I don't really know what to say. I've had this a little bit. Like the past few seasons have been very good, and this one is going well as well. I don't really put it down to anything. But yeah, past couple of seasons have been good. But yeah, let's see how this one finishes.
Okay, all right. Well done. Yeah, for not blowing your trumpet up your bum. But basically, you are, I think, at time of recording prior to Everton Tottenham, just outside top 1K, I want to say.
Yeah, 1,100.
I know that because you were whinging about it. Never mind the 11 million teams that are behind you. Can I just get in for 1 hour?
yeah. And I will get it again for saying it, but I have actually never been inside the top 1,000. And every week I get really close. I get a red arrow, no matter. So going into game week 28, the blank, I made an additional transfer. I had a full 11 out in the blank, and I still got a red arrow for it. And I'm hoping this is going to be the week, because I've still got 15 players left to play. But Harry Kane's going to score a hat-trick tonight, and it's going to dent my hopes.
Well, I hope you've been proven to be right, Harry, but someone's probably going to make a dodgy comment about that now. You finished last year, what, 3K?
Last season, 1.3K.
Wow. So you're just outside top 1K now. You finished just outside 1K last year.
Yeah.
It's interesting because one of the things we often say, and a lot of content creators I speak to, perhaps more in the podcast sphere, say that they think their ranks have suffered since they started doing content. Mm-hmm. Fair to say yours has improved?
Probably, yeah. And it's probably, coincided with I spend as much time as I have awake looking at my team. I'm not really a stats person, to be honest. Like I look at the occasional bit, and if someone posts a stat on Twitter, then I'll look at it and take it in. But I just spend a lot of time thinking and a lot of time planning. I think that's the big thing. I spend more hours on FPL.team or Plan FPL than I do on anything else. Just looking at how my team looks for future weeks, and that's what I spend more time doing the past couple of years that I didn't do before. And I think that's what's really helped.
I've got a good idea of what transfers I'm making in game week 37, but I don't land with ranks like you, mate.
I'm also very boring, and I hate to say it, but it's very true. Like if you look,
so you follow the template a lot.
I follow my template. I follow the template a reasonable amount. I don't tend to sway around it, and then I tend to play my chips quite well. Like if you look over the past couple of seasons, a lot of the big rank gains that were from me playing my chips quite well. It's not always when everyone else plays it. But But yeah, the chips tend to be the difference, and then starting well and not going too off the beaten track. It's boring. And I know a lot of people will say it's not an exciting way to play the game, but points are exciting.
Because I'm a bit shit at FPL in comparison to someone like yourself. I don't get the pressure of your ranks crap. Or have you had that experience yet? Where it's like, oh my god, it's game week 10 and I'm at 3 million, or do people start treating you differently because your channel's grown very quickly? And I guess a lot of that is because you've done so well at FPL, as well as obviously the great content you produce.
I don't. So I think the general point of how rank impacts content is it's more, if you're doing well, it boosts it. And if you're not doing well, it doesn't hinder it, I think is the best way to put it.
Okay.
So if you're doing really well, like, for example, like I am now, it definitely helps things. But if you're not having a good season, I don't think it necessarily has a negative impact on it. It might change a little bit on, what people use for their final decision making, what they, who they view on a deadline stream. But generally, a bad rank doesn't hinder you too much, and a good rank, a very good rank, it needs to be like top, 5K, top 1K type ranks for it to start boosting you on, is where I generally feel like it falls.
So if you're not right at the top end of that, you don't think it necessarily. So say if you've got someone that's going to be consistently like 50K, for example, it's not going to make a huge difference to them, is what you're saying.
I generally get that. I think if you're consistently there over the course of seasons and seasons, then people start to see the consistency there. But if they just look at your rank for this season and see your 50K, I think they think like that's fine. They're happy to watch it, but it's not going to be raking in loads of new people who would click on a video if you are, 500th in the world, for example.
Yeah, but it becomes increased scrutiny, doesn't it, with good ranks?
Yeah.
Have you suffered with copycats? And what we mean by that is people literally copying your every move and have an identical team to you.
So I would say it's started to happen a little bit more. Particularly, I noticed it when we played our wildcards in game week 26, and there were a lot of wildcards active that week, that it meant that a lot of people had very similar teams, and therefore the transfers the following few weeks ended up being very similar. I do tend to build up quite a lot of squad value over the season, whether that's with early transfers, etc., etc. So eventually it gets to the point where I might make a move that, people who might be copying my team might not be able to afford, for example. But it definitely happens, not just to myself. And actually, I think I've experienced it less than others, but we particularly see it at the start of the season. Andy, I know, hid his team going into game week 1. And the amount of people
don't blame him.
No, nor do I as well. Because I think it was last season or 2 seasons ago when Andy and FPL General finished really well. It was harder to finish in the top 10K that year because there were a few hundred teams who had copied them for the majority of the season, and so we're in the top 10K as well. And so when someone like Andy does really well, and I can understand why he does it, in theory there are going to be those teams that have a high finish as well because of it.
So has it made you conscious of what you're doing? Have you done that where you've hid your moves?
I haven't. Some people have asked me to. I haven't done it yet. And I suppose it's different for me, but I look at, Andy, etc., and hats off to them for doing it, because I wouldn't have done it. Particularly, people need to understand that if you hide your team, in theory, might impact how many people are viewing for you. And the views is what pays these guys bills. And I think it's very hard to go and, ask all of these people to hide their teams when, it's going to impact what is their job in theory as well. So yes, there's that spoon feeding part, the copycats that are there, but I think it's very hard to just expect everyone to not show their teams when that's what a lot of, I can spend as long highlighting players, but it's what a lot of content is about.
It's a message I'll get normally via DM, because no one really wants to have the conversation publicly, and say, can you have a word with content creator X, because they post their team up every week and person Y in our mini league is copying it, and we don't think it's fair. Take on that?
So if you're copying someone's team and you lose to, if I lost to someone in my mini league because they were copying someone else's team, I probably wouldn't think that was fair. And it hasn't happened to me, but yeah, I would probably look at it and think, that's not really fair. But I suppose with the way mini leagues are, I would be putting that in the rules of it, that if you could make it clear that you can't copy someone's team, you need to be making, transfers on your own at the start of the season, then I would hope you'd get to the point, like if I did that with my friends and, if I wasn't doing this, I would say that to them, like, let's not copy anyone. And hopefully we'd get to a point where people aren't. And I would hope that would stop it happening. But I'm sure it does happen. But I can't imagine it's very fun.
No, what
team.
A dull life, honestly. I cannot understand. Surely the whole premise of Fantasy Premier League is that you manage to outwit, let's say, 3 million other players or so, right? You manage to outwit all those players. You beat them all. Or even you're in a mini league with 200 players. You manage to outwit those 199 other people, whatever your targets are, rather than literally just copying someone because their historical rank's good. This is why, Harry, I don't suffer with this, but you might start suffering with it a little bit more. You've mentioned, obviously, Andy, General. There was the case with Raptor, wasn't there, where there was like 80 teams literally in a row who had all just copied Ross's team. So I just can't imagine that. But one thing I should ask is, I tried to envisage, and I'll probably never be there, but if I was in your position at this stage, I'd be asking myself, can I win it? Like, can you finish first?
I'm not asking myself if I can win it. Absolutely not. I don't actually know how many points I am off first. I can potentially check, but I'm not asking myself, particularly with the amount of chips I've got left. It's just too far, particularly with, I'm more concerned about, dropping down than I am dropping up. And I suppose that's a personality trait. That's, I'm more worried about finishing outside the top 10K. I'm 95 points behind the person in first at the moment. I'm much more worried about going backwards than I am about going forward. So I'm not going to make the picks in my team that would give me the opportunity to win the game. I'm not going to go and sell. Well, I don't have Haaland, and my team's not a good example at the moment because I have no premiums in it. But I'm not going to go Haaland to the end of the season because I'm going to try and win FPL, for example. My team is still going to stay pretty in line with what the template is, because, as you said at the beginning, we're picking players from about 5 teams now between now and the end of the season. So the differential gaps are just not going to be there for me to get anywhere near it.
Okay, interesting. But what if you did have something and then suddenly we get the game week 36 and you're sitting at 150th or something? Then at that point, that rogue captaincy on Alvarez or something could pay mad at the end. You have to go for it, wouldn't you? And surely at that point, you close off your team because you ain't sharing that prize with nobody else, surely.
Yeah, I suppose I would get to the point where if I was at that position,
Or would you go, my team value's better, so I know I'm winning it?
Yeah, because my team value's better, so I'm going to bring in this player just because they're more expensive, and then you won't be able to. Yeah, I suppose if it got to the point where I was like 3 weeks out and, I was in with a shot of it, for example, then maybe I'd consider it. Maybe I'd leave my transfers like right up until the deadline, for example, and do it like that. But unless we got to that situation, I don't think I'm in the position where I'll be hiding transfers again. Like, my transfers are clear when it comes to the deadline, but I may have made one on a Monday night when there's a price change, for example.
Yeah, that's the easy way round to beat the copycats, is when you make an early transfer, don't go shouting about it. And these are more likely to happen at the start of the season rather than later, where I think the information obviously becomes more important. There's not a right and a wrong for content creators, in my opinion, right? Like, I always stick my team up, but I'm aware it probably doesn't matter too much. But those who want to keep it to themselves, make last minute transfers, those who want to put it out like you do, like, there's no right or wrong. I mean, everybody's entitled to do whatever they want with their own FPL team. It's generally my take. And if you want to share it, you might be happy for people to copy you. I don't know, Harry.
I mean, I'd rather not, but doesn't massively impact me, especially when if it's like hundreds, like I know Ross had it, then then that would start to play on me a little bit. But yeah, if it's the odd person or two, doing the same move, for example, that doesn't bother me.
Harry, thank you so much for that chat, mate. Let me say congratulations in advance for hitting that 50k sub number, because that's an inevitability for you very soon. And good luck for the rest of the FPL season. And if you do get to that position, go fucking Hail Mary and try and win it, will you? For God's sakes, mate. You'd have to give it a go. Have to.
Yeah. Yeah, if I got to that point, then I'd have to give it a go. But I'm not trying to get from 1K to there. That's a big gap. But if I end up 3 weeks out, much closer, then yeah, I'll take your advice.
Good man. Right. Plug all your stuff, your socials.
Thank you. Yeah, it's just quite simply after a nice rebrand, which feels like a long time ago now. It's just FPL Harry on YouTube and on Twitter as well. But yeah, thanks for having me on. It's been great to chat.
You on Insta or anything like that?
Not very much. TikTok, which I still don't know how it works, but yeah, TikTok as well.
That, mate, share some TikTok stuff. We'll get that shared for you, mate. Brilliant. If you want to watch FPL Harry in the Game Week 30 deadline stream on his channel on Saturday, you can't because you have to watch me. But if you want Harry as an alternative, you're more than welcome to. Thank you so much, Harry. Sam Brennan will be joining me for the Sky Fantasy Football podcast tomorrow and on Patreon. James Johnson is testing me on an FPL quiz actually today, which leaves me to say thank you so much to Harry. Cue music, please, Manshard.